Welcome back to GaleForceWins Season 2.
The GaleForceWins podcast is proudly sponsored by Newfound Marketing, a digital marketing agency located in St. John's, Newfoundland. Visit our website at newfoundmarketing.ca to find out how we can help your business grow. Newfound Marketing, a complement to your marketing team.
You go.
Sounds good.
Are you all set to go?
Yeah.
Jerry, you sure this is ready to go? This is the B-roll.
This is, yeah.
Are you in close enough, Jerry? I don't think you are.
I'm not out there.
Okay, and pause. And welcome to another edition of GaleForceWins. And what a pleasure it is. Here we are in Dartmouth Crossing in Nova Scotia, and we're actually in the hotel lobby of one of our former guests that have been on this show, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And it's always fun to be in conversation with people that are doing interesting things, have done interesting things, and I can tell you we're certainly excited about our next guest. I'm Alan Dale, and with me as always my good buddy from the East End of St. John's, Jerry Carew. How are you, Jerry?
I am doing really well. As I always say, I am, but I am. And I got to tell you that this one I'm really excited about. Tom, sitting here, who will introduce himself in a second, and I started working in the radio business in St. John's, Newfoundland in the early 90s. My first job, Alan, after coming out of business school. Tom was part of the management team there, and he was an impressive individual, had a lot on the go, very approachable, and I am fascinated by his journey. Had some recent health issues. We're going to get into all that, and I'll let Tom talk about it. But I'm telling you, Alan, I'm really excited about this because I feel like it's coming back to my roots. The very first sales job I ever had, this man was part of the management team.
That's excellent, Jerry. I can't wait to dive into it. Your first job in the early 90s, you were about 35 back then. Good for you, getting a job that early on.
I was doing the math myself.
Yeah, I was doing the math there too. Tom, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. First of all, for the invitation, and great to catch up with you both in person, because we've done this kind of virtually as a catch up about maybe a year and a half ago. My name is Tom Ormsby. I'm currently living here in Halifax as well. And but Jerry's right. We worked together a long time ago, and I'd forgotten it was your first job out of business school. Wow.
Yeah. Not my first job, Alan. Let's clarify that.
No. You're the
I
one
did
that
have a few jobs. When I was in my
he said his first job.
I thought I heard that. Well,
Did I? Well, yeah.
And, yeah.
He's fact-checking me.
He is indeed. Well, he should be. and my journey currently is I'm in public relations and communications. That's really where I've been the last 20 years, and it's been a great part of my career. I've been blessed to have I think about 3 careers. That's the best way for me to describe it. And but the PR piece has been tremendously rewarding. They've all been rewarding, but I think this is where the evolution was for me, was to end up in this particular space. Okay. And I enjoy it very much.
Tom, let's go back before we get into those 3 careers. Let's go right back to the beginning. Where'd you grow up? How did you grow up?
Yeah, how and where, really different, I guess. Born in Toronto, and to Scottish parents who had immigrated to Canada. There were 4 of us, imagine now, so it was my sister, who's just about a year older than me, and then less than 2 years after me were twins. So we had 4 kids in the house, oldest was 3.
Wow.
So that's a handful for 2 shift working parents. My father was a police officer, my mother worked in healthcare as an x-ray technician in the hospitals, but we went back to Scotland actually as kids. I spent school year in Scotland, went to school in Glasgow. And which really kind of set me up for eventually coming to Nova Scotia, I think, because I've got the Scottish piece looked after. We've got Irish heritage and the rest of the family as well. So that was really interesting, going to school in Scotland for a year. That was quite unique. Back to Canada.
How old were you then when you were?
6 turning 7 or 7 turning.
Wow. Okay.
6 turning 7. I think.
Pretty young. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was still had inkwells on the desks. Oh yeah, the roll-up chalkboard. We still had milk before Margaret Thatcher killed the milk program, apparently, in the UK. We used to get milk every recess. It was mandatory. You couldn't get out. So now, as an adult, I wonder about the poor kids who might have been lactose intolerant or something,
right.
Or dairy issues. But that was quite unique going to school in Scotland. 9 of us living in a 2-bedroom flat with my grandparents and one of my aunts. 2 bedrooms, 9 people.
Wow.
Yeah. No fridge, we didn't have a fridge, but we had a pantry in the corner and a hole in the wall to keep the cold air coming into the pantry. Grandmother used to go down to the market every day, and it was quite a unique experience. And the 4 Canadians in the tenement, right?
What what precipitated that move back to Scotland from Toronto?
My dad developed asthma when he came to Canada, and like many would have assumed, I guess, back then, it was the climate. You know, we're talking the 50s. He'd done his time in the British Army. He'd done actually more than his national service requirement, and then he came to Canada, became a police officer. But he developed asthma, and then so, you know, he said, well, maybe you need to go back. Maybe it's just the climate here is just in the cold. Even today, God love him, he's 86, and you know both parents are doing well. They're both 86. And
in Canada, they're living,
and they still, you know, they're still active, but the cold still gets to him.
Right.
So moved back and brought us all with us. Right. My first airplane was Toronto to Glasgow Prestwick, I guess, airport, and that was our adventure. One suitcase, we sold everything. You know, whatever we had was in one suitcase.
That's a big upheaval for a young family, isn't it?
No kidding. Yeah, my brothers were just about kindergarten age, maybe. You know, yeah, it was quite. It was good. And I got the classic old person tale. It was literally a 2-mile walk to school, because that's the school my aunt taught at. So we had to walk with her to school and then back again every day. And she eventually became a headmistress, so she's retired now as well. But it was quite a unique adventure for sure, and you know, culturally it was different as well. But we went back, and then I think when my dad got there, he realized health was not climate driven. Mm-hmm. And then I have to guess, you know, we never had that kind of conversation, but I assume he probably just recalled all the reasons why he wanted to be in Canada. And so my father eventually came back to his job. He'd taken a leave from the police force,
right,
and had come back, and then we kind of had to finish what we were doing school-wise and stuff, and then we all came back as a family.
You come to Canada, you go back, then you come back to Canada.
Yeah, that was the route. Yeah, so, and that was it. But as a young man, I came down to Newfoundland and on a vacation, and decided, well, I liked it, you know. So I applied for a job at VOCM, you know, and got it. And so I was like, oh, I guess I'm moving to Newfoundland now, and been kind of transient ever since.
That was an on-air job, was it? The first job?
It was news and sports, and a lot of legends in Newfoundland broadcasting. Many have passed on that I've worked with, but you know, Mike Critch, you know, who you see if you watch Son of a Critch.
Yep.
Mark, who I've known since he was 10 years old, and you would know where Mark lived. They lived in the house right across the lawn. I remember Mark cutting the grass, and so Mark's playing his dad in that show.
Right.
And I worked with his father, Mike Sr., and I worked with his brother as well, as you would have as well. You know, we had you know, George McLaren. You know, there were just so many legends.
Jerry Phelan.
Jerry Phelan. Oh, you know what? Jerry was and is. He's still a good friend. We still stay in touch. But Jerry was a tremendous influence on me. He really taught me the news side of the business, and great as a mentor and a coach. He really did get me to understand the business, and it was a tremendous learning. I was lucky to work for such good people.
Well, I'm going to say this, Alan. I was 100% commission salesperson, and Tom, part of the management team. The people at that station molded me, and it sustained a 30-year business development career for me. Talk about Elmer Harris.
Yes.
Oh my Lord.
It's funny, I was thinking of Elmer just the other day myself.
Yeah. Incredible individual.
Yeah. When you talk about complete and absolute decorum, the gentleman never ruffled. You know, he was a complete, under control, thoughtful person the entire time, which was great because we were such a run and gun industry. Mm-hmm. And news was what we fed our listeners, right? That was kind of the core of VOCM. It was the guaranteed news station, and so you know, was whatever was going, we were going at 100 miles an hour down the road with our hair on fire. And Elmer was just, you know,
calm.
You got it. He was the great yin to the yang, right?
How long has it been, Tom, since you've been on the air at VOCM? Because you went by Tommy O, correct?
Yeah, Brian Rogers gave me that name. I didn't start that way.
That wasn't for the news, though, was it?
No.
That was a show.
I was doing it. No, I was doing it as news. I was a news person. But Brian Rogers, who was another great pro in the booth, what a pro. I learned so much from Brian how to prepare to be on air. And Brian, for some reason, just stumbled on my last name, which is not difficult. It's 6 letters, and you pronounce every one in order.
Say it for us.
Ormsby. But people hear all sorts of versions of that somehow when it comes out. And Brian kept stumbling on it, and when he would introduce me for the news, and so he said, "Okay, come on." He eventually said, "Come on up as Tommy O." So he kept saying it. Then other people on the station would introduce me as that, coming up as Tommy O. And then eventually I transferred out to Carbonear, Newfoundland, which was about 90 minutes from St. John's. It was the second largest station we had in the network, to become the morning person, and which was another great experience for sure. And people there used to use my name on there as well. They would call me Tommy O, and I kept using my own name.
Right.
And then one day, I was at an event, and there was a wonderful lady, Doss Mercel from Harbor Grace. And it was a sports event, and she was probably in her 80s at that point, and she what's this lovely woman, great career. You know, she was getting inducted for her time playing tennis in Cuba in like 1930s or something. It was unique.
Yeah.
And I remember, what a wonderful woman. And I introduced myself, and I had my VLCM red jacket on, my blazer, and she said, "Oh, do you know Tommy O?" And I already introduced myself as Tom Ormsby. And she said, "Do you know Tommy O?" And I'm like, "Well, actually, that's what they call me." And that was the day I said, I have to surrender. I have to stop using my own name because no one else was. And that stuck for all these years. Even people I run into today, maybe 30 years later, still, that's what they'll call me. And anyone in Newfoundland who knows me, they'll call me Tommy.
So you haven't been on the air with Tommy O in...
over 20 years. 20 years at least.
I know Alan's dying to ask some
Well,
questions.
there's a lot of questions in there, Tom. So, or Tommy O. What do you want to go by here today?
Well, it's funny, my family calls me Tommy.
Yeah.
Unless they introduce me to somebody, then they call me Tom.
Yeah.
Because my dad is Tom, and his dad was Tom. So to my Scottish family, I'm young Tom.
Okay.
Right? So I'm all of them, right?
You're everything. Okay, young Tom.
Yeah.
Let's go back to young Tom for a second. What was it about Newfoundland? You said you vacationed there and then you applied for a job. Tell me about what you found in Newfoundland back then that made you want to be there.
Well, it was just, for me, I had friends in Newfoundland at the time. And it was just a place that I had, I was there and I enjoyed it, but I was also looking for work, for broadcasting work. And I was working kind of part-time in Toronto in radio at the time. CKMW was called then. It had a series of on-air names. It was a sister station to CFNY, which is known now as The Edge in Toronto.
Right.
Very alternate rock and things like that. And, everyone always said, if you're looking for a real full-time gig to get your foot in the door, you got to go east.
Okay.
And so that was part of it, right? It was just heading east to try to land somewhere. It's like going north.
You got your foot in the door and stayed there, 20 years?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe more.
It was about 20, but I think 19, I think. Yeah.
You'd be the first fellow from Toronto to move to Newfoundland to get a job. Right? Because normally, back then, of course, there's a big influx of people from Newfoundland moving to Toronto and further west, right, looking for work. So that was your first big gig then in broadcast?
Full-time broadcast. Full-time salary broadcasting.
Right.
Because I'd been doing part-time broadcasting in Toronto, and we call it stringer work. They need someone to go to the Blue Jays games and stuff, which was, that was awesome because that was when the Jays were just getting going. I remember covering this rookie named George Bell, who's now in the Hall of Fame, I think. Right. So I was doing those kind of gigs, but I wanted full-time. I knew I wanted to be related to sports in a career, and a sports broadcaster was certainly something that appealed to me. My sister was a world-class sports writer. She recently retired, and she's still actually writing now, even though she's retired. And so I thought, well, broadcasting, that appeals to me. And back then, they kind of had to get your foot in the door somehow. It was very few broadcasting schools and degree or diploma granting institutions.
Right. And so did you go down one of those paths academically?
I did a part-time course at Ryerson. At the time, it was called Ryerson Polytechnical Institute, before it even became a university. Right. And I did writing for radio and television.
Okay.
And that's how I got hired into the part-time role in Toronto, and then eventually the role in Newfoundland. Right.
So thinking back to that small academic experience that you had, how long was the program?
Oh, it was a one-year part-time.
A one-year part-time program. Thinking back to that now and all of the different communication programs that are offered today in colleges and universities, how different was it back then? What kind of things were they teaching?
Well, this was specific to writing.
Okay.
Right. So, for example, if you want to put a storyboard together for, a television show that's 22 minutes long, or or a movie, and kind of teaching you how to write for that, and then how to write for the ear. And I think, for me, that was tremendously helpful because that's how my PR writing is. I write for the ear. I can still write, because I write a lot of speeches.
Right.
I have written a lot of speeches for CEOs and others that I've had to work with. Even for myself, I've had to do presentations. And that learning how to write for the ear was really, really important. And I didn't know how valuable it was going to be throughout the rest of my career. Because I've got some people who are brilliant writers of technical documents and things. You've got to put it to a 3-minute speech.
Just let me ask about that. We've actually last night talked to someone about communications, and we're fascinated by it. Writing for the ear, you're actually sitting there writing. Do you then read it out to see if it flows properly? Like, how do you do this?
That's the right way to do it. But you start. It's funny when I'm writing for someone, I hear their voice and their cadence in my head.
Interesting.
Oh, okay.
All right, so you see the memes pop up in your social media feed, and there's a picture of Morgan Freeman, and there's some kind of meme, and you're literally hearing it in his voice as you read it. And so when I'm writing to say, okay, is this for Jerry? Is this for Alan? Is this for me? Is this for who? And what's their style? And so as I write, obviously we've got some messages that we need to make sure get communicated across and heard and hopefully digested with the audience. And so that's what it's about, is what message am I trying to write? How can I get that message out based on the person and the format? Is it a panel? Is it someone who's going to be reading right from the podium? Are they doing a presentation? But I'm generally trying to, can I break this down so the person who has the least amount of knowledge in this field still can understand it? And then also trying to write in a way to bring the person with you to the message. And I say that not to influence them, but not to scare them. Mm-hmm. If you start with, because I've been involved in 2 mine closures, having to put tools down for 2 mines.
Wow.
And one of them was instant, told them that moment. And if you want them to hear what you're saying, you've got to make sure you take out trigger words that are going to put fear into them, or get them to stop thinking, or stop hearing, and all of a sudden their mind goes 1,000 places.
Right.
So when I'm writing, I'm trying to write for that ear, so that can you hear the message in its full and entirety, and is it clear? And that's really important, because you can put down your message on paper and hand it to somebody, but if there's something in there that's going to stop them from reading and jumping to somewhere else, you've not communicated effectively.
This is fascinating. I really find this fascinating. How does that differ for people? Often use the term understanding your audience or knowing your audience. That sounds a lot more sophisticated than what you're talking about there.
I guess it could be, but I think at the end of the day, it's being empathetic to whoever's you're communicating to. All right? When I used to coach, I did a lot of media coaching for some of the executives and for my team and for supervisors who were going to be maybe at a career fair and maybe someone wanted to interview them. I always said to them, when you see that lens in front of you or the microphone in front of you, that's an avenue to where you want to go. Because at the end of that message, who are you trying to speak to? Is it the community members? Is it the government who's wondering why you're applying for a permit? Is it an environmental group of concern who's not sure about your proposal? And so I think the understanding of the audience is probably more about recognizing who the audience is, and then maybe recognizing their knowledge in the subject matter. I'll give you a really good example, if I may. So I had the pleasure of working with a lot of Indigenous communities as partners across Canada. And when we started one of the mines I got involved in, we were building the first diamond mine in Ontario. There was no Cree word for diamond. And there was no Cree word for haul truck. And so that's kind of understanding your audience. There's no sense me going in and doing a brilliant presentation if I'm going to use a bunch of words that they can't translate.
Wow.
Because it's going to land. So we had to work with the community and with their top I want to say they're top translators who could really navigate both worlds and come up with a dictionary that could be acceptable to those. And so that's kind of understanding your audience, right? To be an effective communicator. No sense talking about haul trucks and diamonds and cutoff points, and if they're looking at you it's just blank stares if they don't understand the words.
But I'm still trying to grasp what you're saying here. I've never thought about this. You still have to convey the idea of a diamond.
Oh, yes.
Explain to me how you did that.
Well, it was just a matter of trying to explain that inside the earth, there were certain things we were trying to retrieve. And the way we would do it would be having to, in this particular case, dig a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
And then as the dirt and other pieces come out with it, we're going to run it through a facility and we're going to separate the dirt from the material we're looking for. And that material is a diamond. All right, so they didn't have a direct translation for the word diamond in Cree, right? And I can't recall at this moment, it's my fault for not remembering, but there was a word that they could use to describe the diamond, right? And sometimes it's a longer process. Sometimes you translate from English to French and it seems like the translation is twice as long. We go from English to Cree, it's even longer than, because it's kind of describing everything maybe in a more wholesome way.
Fascinating, Alan, isn't it?
Oh, it really is, right? I mean, first of all, to discover that these words that we're using aren't going to resonate. It reminds me an awful lot of, Tom, when I first joined the Navy, I remember going through training with a lot of Francophone officers. And I was a Mars officer, a naval warfare officer. There's a lot of technical terms that we were throwing around in English freely. And I knew that my friends, my Francophone friends, these words were hard enough for me to kind of get my head around, or concepts were hard enough for me. And then I was thinking, oh my God, how are these guys doing it? And then I watched these guys advance to admirals and things like that. And I'm thinking, remarkable. At their very foundation, we were speaking, not only was it not their language, but we were speaking our language that was hardly understandable to us.
Yes.
And we never took that into account.
Yeah.
We never acknowledged that this is going to be twice as hard for you guys to make it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
No,
so
I understand 100%.
You know, and that resonates very strongly with me. It's fantastic. Tell me this, Tom. Do you remember the best speech you ever wrote, and maybe the opposite of that?
Ooh, the best speech I wrote. I'm proud of some of them. I guess I hope I'm allowed to be proud of things. Pride's a sin, right? But yeah, there was one that I wrote not too long ago, actually, a few years ago, when we were introducing a new project concept for a mine that we were intending. We had purchased a property in northern in Nunavut, actually, sorry, and we wanted to mine it completely differently. We wanted to reduce the environmental impact to almost zero. We wanted to change the way that we were working with communities to provide benefits, because we found over the years of trial and error and working together that some community benefits work this way, and so we had to put a whole new concept on the table. And we talked about minimal environmental footprint, minimal power use, no GHG, almost a carbon neutral project. And it was introduced at a technical conference, actually, in Ontario, and it was for the CEO at the time. And I wrote it for him. We worked over the concept and what were the key messages and things. And he got a standing ovation at the end of it. Yeah. And I was proud of that one, because it was a concept that the mining industry in our country had not ever tried.
Yeah.
Now, we, at that point, still hadn't tried it, but that was our project intent. So that one went over really strong. We got a lot of requests. Can you come speak in Australia? Can you come speak and talk about this mining concept? We just wanted to change the classic, bring in as many trucks as you can and put this giant hole in the ground to, can we make this little tiny little hole and still maximize everything for the community? It may not come across right now as the way it did, because it was quite a long speech, but a standing ovation at the end by the audience. And so that was...
Now give me the opposite of that. What's one that you go back and say,
no names.
No names. You don't have to give names.
It was because it wasn't that they were really bad. It was that I didn't know my speaker.
By the way, before you go into this, we're called GaleForceWins, but we discovered GaleForce adversity leads to wins. So with that,
so what do they say?
Finish your story.
Calm waters never made a good sailor.
That's right.
So there were two, and it was the same thing. It was a general manager from one of the mines I was working with, and actually it was also the president and CEO of the company. Separate events, but same thing. I need a speech, right? I need a speech. All right, so what? Okay.
And how much time were you given to make this happen?
Enough,
Okay.
That part's okay.
So we can't blame them for giving you short window.
No. So I wrote them each separate speeches, and they loved it. And then I heard them, and I'm watching them boot these things all over, and I'm like, what? And so what it was, I didn't realize, and my fault maybe for not asking, that they like to ad-lib.
Right.
As a habit. But I didn't write these to be ad-libbed. I wrote these, we agreed on messages. They read them, and said, proofread and signed off on them, and then I watched them deliver them going, oh, this is a train wreck going on here. And so at the end, and the general manager at the time, he actually confessed afterwards and apologized. He said, you probably noticed I like to ad-lib. I went, yeah. And with the president and CEO, we had the same thing. I said, okay, and I'm not going to name his full name, Jim, but you know who you are. And he's still a good friend today.
Yeah.
And so we had to agree. So for it was the same thing. Because he was all over the place. He wanted to ad-lib. So we had to agree on a couple things. Here's your introduction.
Yep.
Read it as is, because there's guests you want to acknowledge, or we're going to acknowledge we're on traditional lands, or whatever the appropriate introduction should be. And then there's going to be appropriate exit. And then these are the bullets in here.
Themes.
You must hit these bullets in this order. You can talk to them any way you want, but these bullets, these are the things that we must communicate to the audience.
Right.
So in your style, you can. So that's how we address that. So I never had a speech that they walked out on or anything like that. Luckily in my career, but those two were like, whew, those were just. You're just watching something happening and you just can't stop watching it because it's just a train wreck.
It's interesting. Alan and I we are exploring business communications. There's a fine line between reading a speech versus having some ad lib and being authentic. That's what I think we're trying to do here today, be authentic. We're not reading notes,
Yeah.
What do you know?
What's the key?
Yeah, what's the key to that?
The key, and this is where I've done a lot of coaching for different levels of staff, and I've always said to them, and you probably got these words in your Navy past as well, but stay in your lane, right? You have to know the material.
Yeah.
You have to know the material. You have to know why you're there, what you're delivering, and you have to know what's in your wheelhouse and what's not. Right? Because I've been questioned about everything. I've done interviews across this country, across the world. I've interviewed by Al Jazeera, and so I have to know, I have to be aware enough to know that I don't know everything. And if I don't, be honest about it and don't go there. People get in trouble when they go to places they shouldn't try to go.
Yeah.
Someone will ask them a question honestly, and they're probably trying to help honestly, but it went outside of your knowledge area, or maybe you've just not been exposed to it, or maybe you don't have the latest information on it. That's when people really struggle. So I always coach people, you've got to know your material, know what you're trying to deliver, and be confident in your own knowledge, but just be aware that I'm not a miner as a miner. I spent 15 years in mining, and more than that in industrial work. And I have a very good knowledge of a lot of those areas. But if someone wants to talk to me about what should the slope angle be on the open pit, that's not me.
No.
Exactly,
I can go get that information and I can communicate it, but I'm not going to have a go at whether or not the slope angle should be 15 degrees or 18 degrees or 2 benches or whatever it's supposed to be. That's not my area of expertise, and that's kind of where I try to coach people.
Right.
If you're in logistics, absolutely, you're the expert there. But if I start asking you about, how many people do we need on staff, that's an HR question that you really have to know. Don't guess. Let's get that over to someone who can get the right answer. And that helps people from not getting into areas where they're trying to help most often, but just sometimes it doesn't work.
So if you're asked, Alan, if you're asked in an interview, acknowledge you don't know.
Absolutely, but if you can get the answer, say it. But I'm happy to go get the answer for you. And it's not to deflect, it's just to be accurate. If someone says, how many jobs you're hiring this year at the shipyard, I'd have to check that number.
Right.
Because I know this year at the shipyard, here in Halifax, for example, they had a target, pick a number, it was like 200 or something like that, and I think they've doubled it.
Yeah.
Right, so I might have known that information 8 months ago, but now that information's been changed. That's why you want to check if you're not in that specialty.
Right.
That's the reason you check. It's not to get out of the question in the interview, it's to be accurate with the person who's asked you the question.
Tom, one thing that Jerry and I have had the pleasure, privilege really, to interview an awful lot of people in different areas and different fields. And one thing that often jumps out is people are reluctant to talk. They want to have speaking. They want the questions in front of them. They want to be scripted before they go in. We find, and particularly in business, a lot of people struggle with this.
Yeah.
This natural, free flow, authentic, genuine conversation in a business setting. Explain that to me.
I think for many people it may be what level of exposure do they have to the entire business. So I've been very fortunate in my last few roles where I've been at a very senior level. I sat at the executive table and I was there for the budget discussions, the talent review sessions, the project submissions, also when we had to go to corporate office with a tail between our legs because we're getting told off for doing something in Canada maybe we shouldn't have been doing. And I think that's probably where the level of preparation concern may come from. If someone has not had that broader access to material, it's really, that's where they're going to want to go and get sign off on information as well, and they should, to be honest.
Yeah.
Again, because budgeting could change, every month to month all of a sudden. You look at the last 2.5 years with COVID.
Yeah.
You're trying to put plans together and you can't, you're waiting 6 months for a household good to get shipped to your local Home Depot or something. Imagine what it's like trying to run a business.
Right.
And so I think that might be where the comfort level is coming from. But someone who's probably got more senior access should be more comfortable because they would have a more complete picture.
Right.
That's always how I try to coach people. What do you know? Where's your level of expertise? Where's your lane?
Yeah.
And I'll help you with that.
Right. We went down a heck of a rabbit hole here, but it was very fascinating. Okay, so back to VOCM. So that was your first gig. You said you had 3 big ones. That was your first one. And then where did you move on to next from there?
Briefly did some marketing for the golf industry in Newfoundland because I was trying to, I knew I wanted to go to corporate communications. I knew I wanted to head that direction. I had met some people in there. I had a lot of exposure because of my radio days. When I was working with Jerry in radio, my role was very out front and public for the company. And so, we stopped counting. I'd done over 1,500 public appearances for the organization. Everything from, Little Miss and Mr. Fire Chief to big events. I emceed the Chieftains when they came to St. John's for their first concert. Played on stage with them for the final set as well. I just want to put that out there.
What did you play?
Bowron and Bones.
Wow.
Oh, you got Alan's interest. Alan's a drummer.
Yeah, there we go.
Respect.
Bowron and Bones.
Respect.
You actually
with the Chieftains.
I've got my Bowron signed up on the wall. I mean, poor Paddy Maloney, God rest his soul, passed away this last year. Paddy's on there as well, and Dennis Bell, who was the harp player.
Yep.
Yeah, he was still with the Chieftains at the time. It was the first sold-out show, mile 1.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to
So that's
go
4 careers then, okay.
He wants to go down this rabbit hole, but anyway.
So I looked for roles. So I got a contract opportunity and did some marketing there, and then I had an opportunity with the late John Efford, who just passed. He was a provincial member of cabinet and also a federal member of cabinet. And John was building up a bit of a team for his office in Newfoundland. So I got in. It was more media relations focused and outreach in Newfoundland. So that kind of started me down a more public relations type format for me. And so I did that for almost 3 years with John and with the department, and then. When the government changed over, of course, everyone who was with the ministers at the time, you all exit, which is normal. And so looking for another opportunity, and a friend of mine who I'd met through Ottawa had sent this email saying, look, there's a company looking for someone in public relations and communications for a natural resources project in Ontario. So, sounded like an interesting rabbit hole to go down as well, and so I did. It turned out it was De Beers making their entry into Canada.
Wow.
As they had a 120 plus year history at that time around the world, and they were going to build Ontario's first diamond mine. So they were looking for someone to do public and corporate affairs for the mine. In project office was based in Timmins, Ontario, but the mine was another 500 kilometers north of that. Remote fly in, fly out, middle of nowhere, Hudson Bay lowlands, James Bay lowlands. And so that then was the formal part of my career. So I maybe had my career in 2 chunks, really. The broadcasting side and government side, which really was still community outreach and public relations and public-facing events and stuff, and then into the more formal corporate communications. And so that the De Beers was almost 14 years, I think, with De Beers. Okay. Yeah, it was a great run. They merged Canada and South Africa business units at the end,
right? And
so they had actually put a role in for me, but it was a role I really didn't really have 100% interest in. So we agreed that I would just. Thank you very much for our time, and we'll part friends, and ended up here in Halifax.
And then you make your way back east.
Yeah, I had someone reach out to me about a role here in Halifax, the Halifax Shipyard. I was looking for a director of communications, and the timing was just right. The De Beers piece was coming to an end, and this was something they wanted to put on the table, and so we said, what the heck, next stage of the adventure, and so we headed down east just in time for COVID.
Okay, so you came down. Shipyard was up and running.
Shipyard
contracts in place.
Yes,
We Build Ships Here campaign was over.
Yeah,
won it. Right.
That's right. The HMCS Harry DeWolf was under construction in its final stages of construction, and this is the first vessel in the Arctic and Offshore Patrol vessel fleet that is being constructed.
Well done, ship. We've been on it.
Yes.
In the Turks and Caicos.
Oh yeah, tough life, eh? Yeah.
We worked hard down there, Tom.
That's it. Yeah, I can tell.
We did.
I can tell. And so it came down to help because the shipyard was maturing in a different. They'd rebuilt the shipyard. They got their start up. They got the contracts in place. Construction was underway. Now they needed to kind of work on some reputational issues and things like that. So I came down to give them a hand with that.
Right.
And so great a great opportunity to understand more about the Navy. I've got Air Force and Army in our family, no Navy, so this was a very interesting journey for me to be
Your dad
exposed.
was Army?
My dad was British Army, yeah. Grandfather, great-grandfather, British Army.
And here you are now building ships for the Canadian Navy.
And your brother was in the Air Force?
Brothers in the Air Force, is retired after 38 years, and our oldest son and our daughter are both in the Army.
Is that right?
And our youngest is heading down that road as well.
Wow. So that's fantastic. And thank you all for all that, the entire family for
went right around me.
their service, right? Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that, Tom, because...
Remember what Brian said?
100%. Being involved in building ships for our country is service in and of itself. Tell me a little bit about what it must have felt like to walk in and see those massive ships being put together and you being a part of telling that story, because I have to tell you, it's a beautiful story.
It is. I was really proud to be able to join the team. I didn't quite understand defense contracting, because this is really what this is.
You're not alone, Tom.
Yes, yeah. Apparently most of the world, if not all of the world. But yeah, so I didn't understand it from that. So that was an interesting aspect. But I was very comfortable in large industrial settings. I visited mines, obviously, here in Canada and other parts of the world in my role with De Beers. You know, I've seen 400-ton haul trucks going down the road, which are bigger than houses. You know, so to see stuff on a big scale, like, I'm pretty comfortable with that. But it's still pretty impressive when you're seeing a 6,400-ton ship being built right here in Halifax, and the next ones are going to be even bigger than that when they get to the Canadian surface combatants. But it was really exciting and interesting to see how ships are built now. You know, I mean, we have keel laying. I'm doing that in quotes because it goes back to the old days when they took the best wooden beam and made the keel for the vessel.
Yeah.
Well, now vessels of this size are all built in almost like Legos. Yeah. And so there's no real keel laying, although we still have a keel laying ceremony.
Right.
But it was really exciting to be involved in that, especially since I was involved in the delivery of the first ship, having to work with the Navy and the Government of Canada on that transfer of the ship, both legally and ceremonially, over to eventually Commander Gleason, who was a fine gentleman.
Yeah.
Tom,
I just got to jump in there. Alan, around this time last year, we were lucky enough to get a tour of the Halifax shipyard.
That's right. That's how you and I reconnected. Yeah.
It was, I'm just getting goosebumps because I had never, you're comfortable with big things. I mean, I spent 30 years doing advertising. I'm proud of Irving, frankly. It might sound weird to say that, but it's incredible. Pieces of steel, the equipment that's needed to make this move, it's incredible.
Well, it is incredible, right? Yeah. And the whole national ship procurement strategy, whether it's Irving or Davy or C-SPAN, this whole shipbuilding industry springing alive in our country again, which, quite frankly, it had tailed off for many years.
Well, when we delivered Harry DeWolf, it was the first Navy combat ship been delivered in 25 years.
Right.
Now, it's part of the combat package, you know, so people should, it's an Arctic and offshore patrol ship. It's got a very tremendous function. It's going to be probably one of the most versatile type of ship in the Navy's history.
Right.
But it's the first time they'd had a ship like that delivered in over 25 years, and it was the largest one.
Yeah.
It was the largest one as well. And the great thing about building ships at home, I used to have to deal with the regular, traffic on your social media channel stuff saying, it's all too expensive. And for every dollar invested in Canadian shipbuilding, domestically, it generates 3. You can take that dollar and send it offshore and never see it again.
Right.
Right. And so it's doing a lot of things, right? And it's bringing a lot of people into the shipbuilding industry, which, to your point, had kind of gone pretty stagnant for a while in Canada on that large, important scale. And as we can see, the events around the world now, I mean, we do have to do our part in the defense world. Yeah. And the climate change now, access to the Arctic is going to be huge. I mean, you've got countries that some are not even polar countries building polar icebreakers for some reason, because they're planning on heading up there. So it's a really interesting industry to be in, and I almost 3 years with the shipyard.
So there you go. So you talk about service being all around you, but service was, you were serving right there in that moment. So thank you for that. So Jerry and I had the privilege of sailing on Toronto, which a ship, actually another ship built by Irving Shipyard, but that was built in New Brunswick. St. John, New Brunswick. So we had the privilege of sailing from St. John's, Newfoundland, back to Halifax, went on board a ship of a tour of the Margaret Brook, and then walked in the back of the Irving shipyard where the steel was coming in one end and ships were coming out the other end.
That's exactly how it works.
Right, and it was impressive like you wouldn't believe. We were excited to meet you that day because we had been in communication on LinkedIn and the like. You weren't there that day. Where were you?
You went dark for some reason.
Yeah. I was lying in a coma in the Halifax infirmary.
So take us there.
Wow, it's interesting. I've said this to others. COVID probably saved my life, and I don't think anyone expects those words in the same sentence.
Right.
And I had been working pretty hard at the shipyard, and I've been golfing, but I wasn't feeling well. And at the time, we're talking just over a year ago, in fact, about a year, 15 months ago. At the time, I just wasn't feeling great, and we were getting ready to deliver the Margaret Brook to the Navy. Literally, I'd done all the planning, everything else is ready to go. Okay, I'm going to be in at 7 o'clock in the morning because we're going to sign the paperwork with Ottawa, and we're going to turn over this fantastic vessel to the Navy.
Big day.
It was a big day. I was really excited. I've been working hard all week, but I just wasn't feeling great.
So you're talking about a very public event happening the next day?
Yes. Yeah, it was. It would have been.
Right.
Well,
And
still
your
invited
team-
guests with the limit of whatever COVID
with
restrictions
COVID,
of the
of course,
day.
yes.
But an outdoor event was going to involve
Yeah.
the crew for the Margaret Brook, which is the second vessel in the Arctic Offshore Patrol Program. And anyway, so we had a rule that we were getting tested weekly anyway, a rapid test for the shipyard. And then if you had anything more serious, you had to take your PCR test. But if you weren't feeling great, and this is where good policy is vital. The rule was, and we'd had it from the start of the COVID outbreak, if you don't feel well, show enough respect to your colleagues not to come in and go get tested. Right? That to me, that's a sign of respect, as well as a sign of good policy management. And so I just wasn't feeling great, and I texted the team the night before, said, I don't think I'm going to be there for this early morning legal signatures that we need to do for insurance purposes and things like that to hand over the vessel. I said, but I should be there in time for the event in the afternoon that the public event will be. And I've written the speech, for the president and, for the handover and all this stuff. And I said, so the next day I got up, I just didn't feel great. Went to my local COVID testing center. My wife drove me, I said, I'll pop in and get that done. Popped in, and there's a lot of good fortune in my life. The person who took me in was a nurse. Now, a lot of these centers had a mixture of nurses or other persons because it's administering the swab, and as long as there's nurse oversight and things like that, I believe this is how they work. But I was lucky there was a nurse there who happened to take me, and so she said, "How are you doing?" Not too great. I think I know what it is, but it's kind of bothering me. But I need to get to work. I need to get a test. So I took my test, and then she ran my vitals, and she said, just come sit over here for a minute. I'm going to get the other nurse over. I'm like, okay. I'm thinking in my head, I got to get ready for work tomorrow, and we're delivering a ship, and I just golfed in the club match play. I got eliminated. I walked the course. Anyway, the next nurse came over, and she ran my vitals, and she said, can you just wait here for a minute? I'm going to call a doctor. I'm like, at this point, I'm going, what is going on? And so now I'm texting my wife out in the parking lots.
Yeah.
You might want to get in here. And so my wife just had me coming through the door as I'm getting this text. The nurse comes back and says, we just spoke to the doctor. Here's his name. We've got an ambulance for you. It's on the way. I'm like,
You got to be kidding me.
that's exactly what I said. Like, what is going on? We've got an ambulance. You have to get to the hospital. And my wife just walked in the door. We can drive. They said, well, take this name. That's the doctor. They'll be waiting for you. And I'm like, they're going to be waiting for me. I just golfed 2 days ago. Anyway, so we drive down the hospital, and the person checking me in was a little, I say checking me in. The person one of the people doing the initial screening was, you sit down, and I have the name here. Here's the name of the person. The doctor, no, I don't know that name. And they were kind of half indifferent, I guess they've got a lot of things going on. And
Sure.
so,
And you went in an ambulance.
no, we drove. My wife dropped me at the
Okay.
door. She went to park, and I went in and I sat down and I said, well, I got sent here from the COVID clinic. Here's the doctor's name. So they start the routine again, doing my...
Sure.
He got up and he ran into where the doctors and nurses were. He ran in, and they came running out, and they all grabbed me, just as my wife was coming in the door. And then they all ran me into a room, and started putting oxygen into me. And I'm like, what is going on? And I was there for several hours, and that night I was intubated, put into a coma, and they called the family and said, you better get in here.
Tom, I'm struggling with this because you've golfed 2 days before. You're obviously up walking, you're working.
Mm-hmm. So what was happening is my heart was failing, and I didn't know. And it was leading to a lack of oxygen and stuff moving through my body effectively. And I guess this is what they were picking up with all the vitals that they were checking. Mm-hmm. But apparently that particular day it got to the point where it was critical. And I was induced in a coma. I was in a coma a month. And what happened then, I also had double pneumonia because for the heart failure was causing the pneumonia. So now I had double pneumonia. So this is why I was coughing apparently.
This is October?
No, this is July.
July, that's right, because you weren't there when we went, that's right.
And so my heart was failing, I didn't know. And so I was put into a coma, and then I went sepsis, which is when you get the full body infection.
My goodness.
So now they're piling every antibiotic and everything else into me. I had 20 different monitors at my bedside. I was fully intubated, on life support, and I was on life support 41 days in total. And they were trying to figure out they were trying to battle the infection and the sepsis. That's what they were trying to battle, and the pneumonia, while monitoring my heart. But at first they didn't know it was my heart. They figured that out the next day. They kind of did some tests and kind of eliminated it down to the valve of my heart was failing. So congestive heart failure is the description. So this went on. So I was in a coma for a couple of weeks, and they were planning on doing the surgery on one day. And then so the doctor said, well, we're going to push it out a couple of days because there's 2 other people tomorrow who need to have the surgery ahead of your husband. This doctor talking to my wife. The next morning, 6 o'clock, they phoned and said, you better get in here. We're doing the surgery now, and bring the family. And I had crashed that morning. And one of the nurses had saved my life, basically, that morning. And so they pulled me forward to do the surgery. And then they did surgery on me that day to replace the valve in my heart and repair it. Not replace it. And then I crashed on the table again. They spent 3 hours keeping me alive in the operating room, brought the iron lung and everything in. And I was in a coma for 2 more weeks after that. Yeah. And I woke up, no idea what had happened, no idea how I got there, no idea why everyone was around me. I didn't know where I was. The tubes come out of me everywhere. I was 41 days on life support. I was 63 days in total in intensive care. Tracheotomy, I got plenty of scars all over. Tracheotomy, feeding tubes. I lost 51 pounds because I just was bedridden. I was in hospital 3 months in total. Pneumonia had come back, double pneumonia had come back. Multiple organ failure as well. Multiple blood transfusions, dialysis. It was quite a ride.
So much to. Well, we're glad you're here. First of all, so much to dive into. I don't think we've ever had anybody on the show that's been in a coma.
I didn't know one else either.
But I'm curious. When you come out of that, you say you don't remember anything. Like you don't. You remember how you got there? Or?
There's certainly for me, and I've come to understand for many others as well. There's a brain fog for quite a while. I had other things go on as well. I had microbleeds, which are kind of mini stroke type events when I crashed in the operating room.
Microbleeds in your brain, or
and so there is this fog. So I'll give you a really good example. First of all, I woke up and with my wife at the end of the bed, crying, just telling me over and over how sick I was, and I'm just looking, and I couldn't move. I'd lost all that weight. Literally, I couldn't lift. I had no strength.
No muscle, I guess, at that point.
No. I was 142 pounds. I'm 180 right now, so you can imagine what I looked like at 140.
Yeah. Wow.
My grade 9 weight, right? And but I'll give you an idea to your question though about remembering. So my sister-in-law also happened to be. She came down to give my wife some support and the family some support, and. I remember my sister-in-law being there, and I was really confused why she was there, because this is not what she does for a living, right? She's not a nurse, but she was dressed in a gown like a lot of the staff would be when you're around someone who might have had an infection or something.
COVID is still a pretty big thing.
Yeah, and they thought maybe I had picked up shingles from somewhere in the hospital. I've been out for a month, so I have no idea. But anyway, she was there, and then I remember telling me about I had to have my dialysis. And to this, up until a month ago, I thought that was the same conversation. Turns out the conversation was a week apart that I had with her. Those two things of me seeing her for the first time and then her telling me about it. And I had to do my dialysis. It turns out that was 7 days. Apparently, this is kind of the brain fog. You wake up, you only have, maybe 2 or 3 minutes of any kind of cognitive, and then, you're so tired you go back to sleep. So they kind of figured it was quite a while after that, I think you start piecing some things together, but not all of it.
Right. And upon reflection, and they must have told you, but how was the family doing during all of this? It must have been chaotic.
Yeah. From what certainly I was told and what they shared, and some stuff I'm sure they still keep to themselves. For example, my daughter came down. She was down for 21 days. I wasn't awake I wasn't awake for any of it. I didn't even know she was there.
Right.
All right. She'd taken leave and come down. And
she's living in.
She's up in Ontario. She's in the Army.
Yep.
And I didn't even know she was there.
Right.
All right. Didn't know she'd been there and come back.
21 days. That's rough on her.
Yeah. Absolutely. To coming down, I'm in a coma, and she left. I'm still in a coma. And. But I think they probably went through, and I've said I think they went through more than I did. Mm-hmm. I went through physical stuff, but I was out.
Yeah.
I was out. I was a month. I woke up. We had a new premier in Nova Scotia.
Right.
Literally. Like when gas prices had jumped up, and these were all this taking place while I was asleep. And so, but they saw it day to day. Like my wife was at my bed every day. I was in hospital 83 days.
Wow.
83 days, and they were called in on 2 occasions to say goodbye.
Any vivid memories or hallucinogens or
In the
anything?
coma?
Yeah.
Everyone asked me that for sure. I didn't have much. I think I was starting to get some. I had some really strange dreams, but I think it was probably right before I woke up, because I was starting to pick up probably on some conversations that were happening.
Right.
But there was one really strange one, a recurring one I had. So. This is for anyone who's lived in Conception Bay South, right? So there's IGA up in Kelligrews, and it was me and my young fella, and I was trying to buy ice cream, and they wouldn't sell me ice cream, and I had that one over and over again. Right?
Sure.
We picked it out, we got to the counter, no, we can't sell it to you. And I think what it was is I'd had feeding tubes in, and again I had a tracheotomy, and I had all the, and I guess my throat was so sore or damaged. I was probably looking for because that was the first words I spoke to the nurse. The first words I spoke when I came to, and not just, it took me a while before I could speak after I came to, but when I finally tried to speak, the first words I got out of my mouth, and the nurse's ear was right here, was ice cream. So I probably, the irritation from everything that was going on, I was probably subconsciously wanting ice cream for my throat. But that was a strange dream I was having, that I kept going to the IGA, they wouldn't sell it to me.
I don't want to make light of anything you've been through, but man, imagine the PR you could do for an ice cream company.
Well, here you talk about strange now. So 41 days on life support, coma for a month, 83 days in the hospital, heart failure, all the other things that went on. And my insurance company told me I wasn't sick enough for critical insurance. They told me I wasn't. Turned down my critical insurance claim. I'm like, really? Like, what do you need to do?
What do you need to do?
What do you need to do at this point? Right?
Tom, remarkable. Remarkable, and what a strong family you must have.
Oh, I'm blessed. I'm absolutely blessed. Right?
Yeah.
I had to learn to walk again. I had to learn to eat again. To this day, despite how much I talk, my jaw still don't open fully. Mm-hmm. Scars, I can't even tell how many scars I got.
So why would that be? Was it because of the work being done on you, maybe?
8 weeks, 7, 8 weeks of not using them. Right?
Really?
Complete muscle. I
Seized
lost
up a bit.
27% of my body mass. Wow. When I was in hospital, 27% of my body mass. Right? I literally had to learn how to walk again.
Wow. Tom, did you have occasion to run in to those nurses and people that were in the right place at the right time to get you to where you are now?
Not since. So one of us, one nurse and our family we're connected socially on social media. Another Newfoundlander, but she was terrific. But no, because so much COVID restrictions about accessing hospitals
Right.
and being in hospitals, it's just really difficult to get. It's different now in the last, I think, 6 or 8 weeks or something like that. So we have plans to go back, but I wanted to go back sooner. But there were so many COVID restrictions about accessing a hospital that you just couldn't. Like, for example, my family can only come in one person at a time.
Yeah.
And if you changed out that person, they couldn't come back for another week. Right. So you couldn't have someone pop in to check on you the next day, and no, it was one person per week.
That really complicated it for you. No wonder your family had it harder than you, frankly.
They sure did, and they saw everything. They had to make some pretty difficult decisions.
So Tom, your mom and dad, where were they in all of this as it was going on? Because they live in Ontario, correct?
Yes, yeah. But my wife was the hub for everything, right? She kept everyone informed.
What's your name, Tom?
Sharon.
Sharon.
Yeah.
I probably would have met your wife all
absolutely.
those years ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah. So she kept everyone together and shared all the information that she could, and she was certainly the rock for all of that. And our kids are, like everyone's proud of their kids, and I think they're pretty strong too. But I mean, they saw more than any child should.
Right.
I was in a pretty bad way.
Yeah.
When I woke up too, like I couldn't move my arm, I couldn't see out one of my eyes because there was an infection in my eye. I picked up when I was in a coma. Well, my arms got damaged somehow, so I've got a torn rotator cuff, and I couldn't. It was quite a state, right? I mean, I went home with a walker. I had to use a walker when I got home.
Wow.
Yeah.
People often, many people would complain about healthcare in Canada, but I'm sure you're not one of them.
Oh no, and and it's funny. We have those conversations too, and I'm sure there's improvements that can be made anywhere. And maybe there's improvements in the healthcare system, but to a person who look after me, it's not the people, right? It's not the people. They're doing their best with what they've got, and what they were dealing with was pretty tough stuff. But sure, could they use better machines? I'm sure they can. And is there a better way to do stuff? I'm sure there is. But to the people I had the good fortune of looking after me, they were all doing their very best. So I was lucky there. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so we could spend hours diving into this. You've had a wonderful career in the past. That is quite a deviation from everything. What's over the horizon for Tommy O?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting, right? I'm finished up with the shipyard. I finished up just about 2 weeks ago with the shipyard, and so now I'm kind of thinking, this is my Lisa LaFlamme moment here now. I'm still young enough to want to work, but I'm not sure what direction it's going to take me yet. I've had some people say, well, I'd love you to do some coaching and consulting and run some workshops, because I do a lot of crisis management and crisis training and things like that, but. I'd still like to be working. My health has come back. I worked really hard on my rehabilitation. I had home care for about 3 months, and to deal with some other issues. I had a lot of lingering issues, but I'm a year. It was, as we are recording this, it's a year and 2 days since I got out of hospital.
Wow.
And I put the weight back on that I wanted to put on. I've exceeded the benchmark for people of my age who do the stress test, basically, that on treadmill and stuff like that. So a clean bill of health that way. I still have a lot of inflammation in my body and things like that. It's slowly going back to normal levels, but at one time the inflammation in my body was more than 7 times the normal level.
So like arthritic
whole body, because of the infection and everything else. I was down 40 pounds. I couldn't get my wedding ring on. So badly, my joints are swollen, things like that.
Wow.
So those things, but I'm overcoming those. So I do want to work. Mm-hmm. Thinking about hanging out my own shingle. But if someone says, "Hey, we need you on the team," I'm happy to chat too. So I don't want to stop working just yet. Right, a lot of things I'd like to accomplish still. So
there's an obvious question here.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about writing a book?
I have about the experience.
Right.
For sure. So many publishers out there, give me a call. But yeah, we have, because I think there's some good lessons in there to share with people. One of the things that they told my family was one of the reasons I survived was because of the general health I had when I was sick. The lifestyle that we led. So people have teased me for years. I drink decaf coffee. I don't do sugar. I don't do salt. I exercise. I do enjoy, an adult beverage. I won't lie. But my general health was in good form, and the doctors had said on more than one occasion that helped me get through what I went through, because I was told by someone from the healthcare side of things that more than 90% of the people that went through what I went through don't make it.
I'm sure that's a
so, so there's some really good lessons there, I think, and then some good lessons on recovery. The mental part of recovery was hard because I was frightened. There's two things that frightened me to death. The first one was when I saw myself in the mirror. I was 142 pounds. I'm almost 6'1", and I was 142 pounds. I looked, and scars notwithstanding, because the scars is, I can get that part. But I just looked emaciated, and I had no strength. There was skin hanging off my body. It was just, my hair was falling out, and it was a
litany of issues.
Yeah, I just looked at myself, is this me? Like what? And then I got readmitted at the hospital 2 weeks after I got out, and they thought I had a heart attack. And I had not a heart attack the first time. And so, well, it turned out it was pericarditis, which is a swelling of the lining around the heart. Mm-hmm. And this is why I had so much inflammation in my body and things like that. Apparently it's not uncommon, but I was really scared that I might have had a heart attack. I'd just been in hospital for 3 months. I was home 2 weeks and I was back in. And I said, if this is a heart attack 2 weeks after all that care, I thought this is not a good road to be down. But they determined it wasn't. It was the pericarditis, which was something they can treat with basically 90 days of medication, and they did. So,
did your? I know you had a healthy lifestyle from a food perspective, but this podcast is a business-oriented podcast. We have a lot of people, men and women, in very responsible positions watching and listening. Did any of your particular way of working contribute to this?
I don't believe so. It's not, again, because it's not heart attack, right? Which can be brought on by stress and things like that. It just appears that, the valve in my heart, and one of the doctors thinks I may have actually been born with a valve that over time it just finally gave out. So I don't think it's that. But to your point though, Jerry, I think it's really important for those who have the ability to put policy together or benefits together, the wellness part is so important for the workforce. Whether it is, making sure they just work the hours they should work to stay healthy, make sure they get, enough time to have sleep, encourage, fitness to the point of people are healthy. We have a culture here in Canada, and it certainly seems to be in Atlantic Canada, where, whether it's obesity or overweight issues appear to be much, much higher than they should be. North America, I guess you could say as well. Mm-hmm. And, that would be my message to those in positions of power influences. Are you providing your team members that kind of support, both mentally, and emotionally, to find out, how can you make their lives healthy? How can you help make their lives healthy? It's an individual's choice at the end of the day. It's my choice not to have caffeine,
right? Because
I know it's not good for me. It's my choice not to have add sugar to my stuff and sugar beverages and stuff like that. And, I make those choices, right? But some people need help making those choices, mm-hmm. and if you have the ability to do it, whether it's through your organization or otherwise, that would be my message: is to really try to get involved in that, because that's what apparently helped save me.
Well, I want to jump in there, Alan. I mean, I was in the newspaper business after the radio business, and that had daily deadlines. There are some individuals that never survived in that particular role, but I did, and I thrived on it. I guess problematic. Part of it was I'm so passionate about that industry. I'm very passionate about what Alan and I are doing, and I do know Alan and I have talked about this. Like tomorrow we're going to be at DevSec. We're going to produce 30 interviews in 3 days. I worry sometimes about my own intensity, and I'm trying to rein it back. You're smiling, I see, but to be successful in business, you've got to have intensity. Give us some advice, please. I'm reaching out to you.
Well, it's funny. Right? So I'm a PR guy, public relations guy, but we work in our industry on setting what's the goal. What's the goal?
Yeah.
Right. And so, and it was funny because I've worked for a lot of presidents, CEOs, and when I put forward, my I guess the measurements of what we are going to be trying to attain in the coming business year, I have to go through this coaching thing with every new one, because I'll put down things like, safety targets being achieved. And they're looking at me going, well, that's the job of the safety person. I'm going, no. It's my job to support the safety team to get to those numbers. Exactly. Just like it's my job to help the production team to get to their production numbers. So what do I have to do to help that team? And so, to me, it's about goal setting. You're going to DevSec, and for those who are watching the here. It's a defense show here every year in Halifax in October. It's one of the big ones in the country. And if you've got 30 interviews, I mean, to me, you've set a goal for yourself. And is it realistic? And we've all heard about SMART goals, it's measurable and attainable and things like that. But I think it's always the goal at the end of the day. So for me, it's passion. I think you call it intensity, I call it passion. I think there's a difference, right? But then with that passion, it's still recognizing things like, am I at my best? What's stopping me from being at my best? I've told my team members many times, because we've done so much. We've done a lot in crisis management. We've flown all around the country and stuff like that to deal with issues. But I still make sure, have you eaten? How much sleep did you get? It's like sometimes going to work around the clock. No, don't. You can't work around the clock because you're not going to be at your best when I need you, or when the team needs you, right? So it's setting your goals and making sure the team is set up for success. And so is 30 interviews over 3 days attainable? That's I don't know your field to say that is or isn't, but it seems like a lot.
Oh, it's attainable, but it's a lot. But I'll say something. Frankly, I'm amazed that you're willing to throw your hat back in the ring. After what you've been through, you deserve a break. Give us an idea of why. Why, Tom? Why put your hat back in the ring of business?
Well, it's not necessarily just about business, but it's just I enjoy the field of public relations. I enjoy it because public relations ideally is two-way relationships. That's really what public relations is about. And I enjoy getting to those mutual goals. I enjoy the style of work. I enjoy coaching. I enjoy coaching so much more at this stage of my career. I'm really keen when I take on someone on the team, let's work on your professional development. I think that's probably what drives me the most. I have a lot, I believe I have a lot still to give. And if it's in the coaching space or developing of teams and things like that, that's probably at the end of the day is what's driving me. I don't want to not share what I've been so lucky enough to learn. Right. And I've learned from some unbelievable people, and I just want to pass that stuff on. And so that to me, I can do it in a setting where there's still business goals being achieved, but there's individual team goals and individual development goals being achieved at the same time.
Tom, we often ask our guests on GaleForceWins to leave the audience with a piece of advice. Now, you're a guy who's had a remarkable journey, a tremendous emotional event in the middle of it for you and your family. Coming out the other end, you look like $1 million.
Oh, thank you.
You can tell an amazing story. You're clearly back on your game, or clearly very close to on your game right now. What would that piece of advice be? What would you say to people?
I probably just build off what I was just sharing with Jerry and yourself there about that personal development. All right, that's so important. Like I've seen in my career where it gets one of the first budget items that gets shaved when numbers start getting tight. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, we can't do that training. We can't. That stuff has to continue because if you keep empowering your team and your employees and your colleagues through that, then they'll keep bringing more to the table. Yeah. Right? That's to me. That's the advice. Is keep that professional development going. And I know there's different models. Like you can be taught in-house with a mentor. Okay, great. But make sure it's a really good quality mentorship program, not just something ad hoc on the back of a napkin. Like keep developing your team, because your team they'll want to keep putting stuff back into the organization because you're putting stuff into them. Right. To me, that would be my advice.
Jerry, your thoughts?
Missed me after all these years, didn't you?
Listen, you were always an impressive individual. You have certainly, your personal growth journey has been spectacular. I can just tell, Alan, you're so impressed with this conversation, so am I. I mean, it's one thing, Tom, to talk about your business journey. It's another thing to have that near-death experience and be in a coma for how many days again?
A month.
I can't even begin to express my thanks to you for telling us about this. Because when we talked, I wasn't sure if you wanted to go down that road, but I'm sure anyone watching this is very thankful that you're such a good communicator and you're willing to share that story, because frankly, this is an amazing experience to be sitting next to you and just, I am so inspired to do better because of what you've been through, and I appreciate you for being here.
I appreciate those words, Jerry. We've been friends for a long time.
One last question.
Yes.
What was it like walking up on the stage with the chieftains?
Well, I emceed the show, which was wonderful, and it was just, you know, it was. They're legends, right? They're
Right.
absolute legends. But I will tell you that I'd seen them in rehearsal. I knew how good they were. They filled that stadium with nobody in it. Musically, like, it was just like if someone had come down from Mars and walked in there, they would have known these guys are good.
Right.
What a feeling to be there with the chieftains and all of the chieftains, right?
Right.
You know, who, again, we've lost some since, right?
That's a whole other episode.
That's why I left it like that, because I feel
We'll be
that
back
is another
if
episode
he's willing
right
to sit
there.
with us.
Yeah, of course.
Well, another wonderful episode of GaleForceWins on a journey from Ontario to Glasgow, through Newfoundland, working with some amazing Canadian companies, some amazing Atlantic Canadian companies as well. Building ships for our country being a big part of that, and that's important to Jerry and I. And then down a journey into the healthcare field like I've never heard before. Simply spectacular. I can tell you this with all honesty, the world needs more Tom, Tommy, Thomas, Tommy O for sure. Thanks very much for your
Thank you,
time.
Alan. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Tommy O, back on the air again.
Thank you, Jerry. Good to be with you.
Cheers.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to GaleForceWins. That's GaleForceWins, WINS.com.